Bactria is the name of a historical region located at the crossroads of present-day Afghanistan and Tajikistan. In the 3rd century BCE, a Hellenistic kingdom known as the Greco-Bactrian Kingdom emerged here. This became possible thanks to the widespread Hellenization of Asia that began under Alexander the Great. Today we will explore the history of the easternmost and most enigmatic of the Greek states. Bactria was one of the most remote provinces of the Achaemenid Persian Empire. After his defeat by Alexander at Gaugamela, King Darius III intended to retreat there in order to rally his forces for continued resistance against the Macedonians. But on the way he was murdered by Bessus, the satrap of Bactria, who then proclaimed himself king. Alexander, who styled himself as the new Persian monarch, could not allow the existence of a rival and thus pursued Bessus relentlessly across the Amu Darya and through Bactria all the way to Sogdiana. Bactria, in turn, became a province of the new Macedonian Empire. Alexander spent 2 years there, suppressing the last pockets of resistance. Incidentally, it was from Bactria that Alexander's wife Roxana hailed. After his death during the wars of the Diadochi, Bactria, like all the other eastern territories, fell under the rule of the Seleucids, under whom the Hellenization of this satrapy continued. The high level of Hellenization in Bactria was confirmed by archaeological finds in the city of Ai-Khanoum, which was abandoned and rediscovered in 1964. The city was laid out in the Greek manner, with an acropolis, a theater, and other typical Greek structures, and it was rich in works of art. It is also worth noting that more Greeks and Macedonians lived in Bactria than in many of the more westerly provinces, as the rulers used these remote lands as a place of exile for those they deemed undesirable. Located on the very edge of the empire and inhabited by freedom-loving Hellenes, Bactria was a largely self-contained region. Moreover, the Seleucids did not interfere with the organization of satrapies modeled after Greek polis. As a result, once the Seleucid kingdom began to face internal political difficulties, Bactria, along with neighboring Parthia, was among the first regions to declare its independence. This took place during the reign of the 3rd Seleucid king, Antiochus II. Around 250 years before our era, the satrap of Bactria, Diodotus, declared himself king. The capital of the new kingdom became the city of Bactra, or Balkh in present-day Afghanistan. The Seleucid kings were constantly preoccupied with wars in Palestine and Asia Minor, and so were unable to respond promptly to developments in the eastern satrapies. Moreover, due to its geographic position, Parthia always bore the brunt of the initial Seleucid offensives. Thus, the Greco-Bactrian Kingdom broke away without any armed conflict, and for the first 40-odd years of its existence, it continued to develop in relative peace. Very little information has survived about Diodotus I, as well as about many of the later kings of Bactria. His dynasty ruled for only a short time. It is known that Diodotus II entered into an alliance with the Parthians, possibly to wage a joint struggle against the Seleucids, and such pro-Parthian sentiments may have been the reason for his overthrow by Euthydemid I. It is also possible that Diodotus II sought an alliance with Parthia to counter a rebellion that had already begun, but if so, it did him no good. Euthydemid founded a new royal dynasty and remained in power for 35 years. During his reign, the Seleucids under Antiochus the Great finally managed to launch a large-scale campaign to the east with the goal of regaining lost provinces. They were partially successful. After defeating Parthia, Antiochus invaded Bactria and laid siege to its capital for 2 years, but eventually entered into negotiations. Like the Parthian king before him, Euthydemid acknowledged Seleucid suzerainty, yet he managed to retain his own status. From that point on, the Seleucids no longer attempted to reincorporate Bactria into their empire. Euthydemid's main arguments during the negotiations were that he had overthrown the original usurper, Diodotus, and therefore, from the Seleucid point of view, was not himself a usurper. Moreover, maintaining Bactria's independence was in Antiochus's own interest. The region served as a buffer state between the Seleucid Empire and the Central Asian nomads, and by holding them in check, Euthydemid was providing a valuable service to Antiochus. On that basis, the Seleucids withdrew from Bactria. The alliance between the two states was cemented through a dynastic marriage between Euthydemid's son Demetrius, and the daughter of Antiochus the Great. At the beginning of the 2nd century BCE, the Greco-Bactrian Kingdom began expanding into India. This expansion was facilitated by the fall of the neighboring Maurya Empire, which had lasted for more than 130 years. Its collapse led to religious conflicts between Buddhists and Hindus, and one theory suggests that the Greeks' eastward campaign, beyond the usual economic motives, may also have been driven by a desire to protect Buddhism, which had gained significant influence in Bactria. Indeed, a Greco-Buddhist movement later emerged in the conquered territories. At the same time, the expansion also marked a return of Greek control over the Indus Valley lands previously taken by Alexander. The Indian campaign proved highly successful. The Greco-Bactrian kings reached as far as the Ganges, where they fought against the Hindu Shunga Empire. Vast territories corresponding to modern-day Pakistan and northwestern India were annexed to the kingdom. However, while the main forces were in the east, a coup took place in Bactria, and a new usurper, Euthydemid, declared himself king. The Euthydemid dynasty failed to reclaim control over Bactria, and Euthydemid and his descendants, in turn, were unable to annex the Indian possessions. As a result, the state fractured. The Greco-Bactrian Kingdom continued within its pre-expansion borders, while the conquered lands gave rise to the Indo-Greek kingdom. The fragmentation of the state and the ensuing civil wars weakened Bactria. Preoccupied with internal strife along the Indian border, the Greco-Bactrians were left vulnerable on other fronts. The Parthians wasted no time in exploiting this weakness, seizing parts of their neighbors' territory. Most importantly, the Greco-Bactrian Kingdom ceased to be a reliable barrier against the nomadic tribes of Central Asia. Some peoples, driven out by others, were forced to migrate south and east, and Bactria came under attack, first from the Saka tribes, and then, around 125 BC, it was completely overrun by the Yuezhi, a people advancing from the direction of China. It appears that the Greco-Bactrian kings managed to seize part of the Indo-Greek kingdom's territory in the region of Arachosia, or what is now northern Pakistan. They continued to rule these lands for more than 50 years, until they were once again conquered by the Yuezhi. However, it is possible that a different branch of the Euthydemid dynasty was in power there. In any case, since the Greco-Bactrian kingdom had ceased to exist, historians classify these rulers as Indo-Greek in the historical chronology. The eastern part of the Indo-Greek kingdom entered its golden age in the mid-2nd century BCE. Its greatest territorial expansion took place under King Menander, a patron of Buddhism who himself converted to the religion. Although the precise boundaries of his realm remain unknown, the Greeks undoubtedly reached the capital of the Shunga Empire, Pataliputra, modern-day Patna in India. The ancient Greek scholar Strabo, in his work Geography, wrote that the lands of the Greco-Bactrian kings bordered even on China. Much less is known about the kings who ruled after Menander. The most reliable sources about them are coins bearing their names, though the exact dates of their reigns can only be roughly estimated, and the extent of their territories inferred solely from where these coins have been found. It is clear that after Menander, in the 1st century BCE, the Indo-Greek kingdom steadily declined. By the middle of the century, its control no longer extended beyond the Punjab. Even this region was at minimum divided into 2 parts, each ruled by its own king. The last stronghold of the Greeks was eastern Punjab. Scythian tribes, continuing their southward migration, seized it in 10 BCE, marking the end of the Indo-Greek kingdom and the rise of the Indo-Scythian one.